So I was at this steam rally, I think. It was a huge grassy field full of different rides, and at the end of the park was a roller coaster. Like the rest of the rides, it had a dilapidated look to it, seeing as it had obviously been put here on site, put together for the event. I made my way towards it and got into one of the hanging seats. The seats were plastic and purple to match the rest of the ride, and they were connected to the track just above my head, so they dangled from it and swung lightly in the wind. The ride was great fun. It seemed to contain vague references to a film I had watched a while ago, and towards the end, the mechanism which connected the seats to the track moved over the metal in such a way that it made a rhythmic melody. I got off and got straight back on again. By the third time round, I was able to hum the rattling melody along with the mechanism as the ride finished. I reached the bottom of the hill where the ride ended and began making my way back to where it began, laughing all the way. Halfway up, I heard two people come up behind me and realized it was two of my so-called classmates from school. Seeing as they had been two of the few who hadn't bullied me that much, I decided not to ignore them, as, strangely, they started up a conversation with me. They said about how I looked like I was having loads of fun on the roller coaster, and I immediately suggested that they should ride it too. They agreed, and we all made our way to the top of the hill, where the roller coaster began. This was when things got weird. I realized that I'd spent all my money on the roller coaster already, and, kind of embarrassed, I asked if either of them had any money. One of them nodded, but simply threw it in my general direction. I managed to pick up most of the coins, but then realized that some was missing and looked over to see that the person in charge of the ride had already picked it up. It was only now that I actually took in the features of the roller coaster attendant. It was not a man or a woman, but a child. A baby, in fact. It looked to be about 3 years old and wore a black t-shirt. The child had indeed picked up what I had missed, and I asked if I could just give him the rest of the money I had collected, and then the three of us could ride the roller coaster. However, it shook its head and said that I had to pay all the money together, and that the money that had fallen towards him didn't count. With some frustration I tried to argue, but this seemed to anger him a little. He reached behind him and began pulling at one of the boards in the wooden wall behind him. I was instantly intimidated by what he might produce from behind the planks, so I pushed his hand away from it and tried to intimidate him by moving closer and glaring at him. It was only now that I realized that his eyes were a milky blue with no black in the center. This caused me to assume that he was blind and that the method of intimidation that I used would be ineffective. It was at this point that the child bit me. I picked him up angrily and yelled at him for this. My two classmates, who were still stood watching, began scolding me, so I put him down. He immediately scurried to the plank of the wall again, pulling something from within and making a turn, but I snatched it from his hand. It was a sharp, silver needle, quite thick and about 8 centimeters in length. I held it up pointedly so that they could see I was right to be intimidated by this young menace. But they had gone. I frowned, but suddenly I found myself sat on one of the plastic purple seats. The ride began, and I wondered what was going on. After about 5 minutes, I realized what was wrong. The track cut off abruptly about 20 meters away. Frantically, I began searching for any way to get out before the track ended. It was at this point that I noticed something, and I was a little surprised that I hadn't noticed it before. Between the ground beneath the roller coaster, which had ended a couple of meters behind me, and the rest of the fair, which I could see further off, there was a body of water, which stretched off in both directions as far as I could see. It looked to be only a few meters across, and seeing no other option, I figured I could use the momentum when the cart came from the track to jump over the water onto the grass on the other side. However, The moment that I jumped, I realized how flawed my plan was. The ground was a lot further away than I had thought. The river, which had seemed only a few meters across, was now revealed to be a huge lake, a good 10 meters across. I knew that if I were to hit the ground from this high up, I would surely be killed, so I found myself with no other alternative but to let myself plunge into the water below. The impact didn't hurt as much as I thought it would, and frowning, I looked around me. The bank underneath the side of the roller coaster I had fallen from looked around 3 meters away. I figured I could swim the distance, but as I began to move, I became instantly aware that this was a big mistake. I saw movement in the water around me and felt something move past my leg. There seemed to be many of them, and suddenly they emerged from the water, coming straight at me. They looked to be half seal, half fish. They were about 1 meter long, and their bodies were thick and grey, rubbery as they brushed violently against my legs. They began to swarm around me. I found myself being pulled under. I tried to shout, but water kept filling my mouth. As I was nearly fully submerged by the freezing water, I saw their leader. A menacing creature, almost 3 times as large as the others, and its face could only be described as that of a shark. Beady eyes and a pointed triangular nose. It dragged me down and everything went black. However, the next thing I knew, I was back in the water, waist deep. I could feel the bottom of the lake scraping against my feet every now and then as I struggled to stay afloat, and the bank was mere feet away from me. Once again I started towards it, only to be greeted by even more terrible things. Wriggling, leech-like caterpillars crawled for the bank as I reached it and covered me, burrowing in my skin. I tried to shake them off, but couldn't. As I ran towards the point where I could see the roller coaster cruising low above the landscape, I hoped to climb onto it. However, as I did, I saw that there was a man sat with his friend, and he was saying that after this point, there was no automatic lock-in. This meant that if the safety bar was up, it wouldn't come down after this point. Realizing that I wouldn't be able to hold on without it, and that I would surely die if I fell to the ground as the car got higher and higher, I jumped off before the ground got any further away. I rolled and blacked out again. I woke once again in the water and began swimming desperately towards the bank. With this I saw a large wall of rocks that now ran around the bank, leaving only a couple of meters of grass between it and the water. This area was littered with rocks also, and as I reached it I became aware of the creatures that sat watching me from their peaks. They looked to be human, only their hair was black, long and matted. Their skin was pale grey, and they wore very little. One approached as I pulled myself onto dry land. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the water. I was covered in cuts and bleeding badly. As I continued to stare at my tattered reflection, I felt the presence of the creature beside me. Before I could react, it had clamped its hands around my face. They were wet and cold, and I tried to scream, but couldn't. With this, I found myself being dragged across the rocky grassland. Soon we emerged from it onto an area that was just grass. With this, the creature let go of my face and took my hand instead. Able to see better now that it had taken its hands from my face, I could see that it was now accompanied by another of the creatures. As they continued to lead me across the bank, I spoke. Not wanting to provoke them into attacking or hurting me, I cautiously asked, what they had done to my face. This became apparent, however, as I saw the roller coaster coming into view. They led me onto it, and as I sat, I had what seemed to be an out-of-body experience. I could see myself and the creatures that were gathered around me. I was no longer cut or bruised, and my face was clear and no longer bleeding. However, my hair was now long, black, and matted like theirs was. As the roller coaster took me back to the start, I saw that the fairground was now deserted. Getting off the ride, I began to walk through the desolate place. Then I was back in the caravan. It's odd, but I can never really remember how I found my way back, or, even where I entered the caravan from where I was, but without fail, I always get back here. Also, I've noticed that every so often, when I return from the other realm, there will be a new sound file waiting for me on the laptop's hard drive. I can't help but wonder how this person gets into the caravan to put down food or insert new sound files. I hope to find out one day, but for now, I can only wonder.